So this morning, I decided to bring you to a very special place to me in my heart. I brought you to a place that I love to come in the spring, and I've done this ever since I was a very young kid. And this time of year is one of the most opportune times you have to fish offshore and have really good fishing offshore. And whether that's for panfish or even as we get into the walleye season, that you're going to be able to catch very nice fish from a standing point without a boat. Now, thinking about all of the things that we have going on in the state right now with the coronavirus and Governor Walz saying that we need to stay at home, one of the things that he is encouraging is to get outside, that we do need vitamin D, mental health, exercise, and one of those activities is fishing. Take advantage of that. Of course, we don't want to be standing shoulder to shoulder on the shoreline, but as you can see, I'm all by myself right now. And it's really easy to do this, and I think people forget about that opportunity in the spring or any time of the year, that it's so simple that you can literally grab a handful of items from your garage and come down and catch fish. I want to show you a couple of those things. My name's Jason Durham, and I'm in my hometown right now, the metropolis of Nevis, Minnesota. That's population 360, and that's people, not thousand. It's not 360,000. It's a tiny community in northern Minnesota, and this place has been a part of my spring for my entire life. Now, I want to show you some of the things that I bring along to make this really simple. First off, I always bring a 5-gallon bucket. And the reason I do that, not only can I carry some of my gear in here, if I catch fish, I can put it inside. If I want to sit down, I can use it to sit on. Some of the things I've got in here, today it's pretty basic, and keep it simple. I just brought my ice box with all my jigs from ice fishing, because you don't have to make this a big production of changing over from ice fishing to open water fishing. You can make it a simple transition. These fish are not super active. They don't want a giant bait right now. They don't want, something that they're going to eat in August. They want something minute, the same size that you would use for ice fishing. So I brought those small jigs. I've brought a couple of fishing rods with, and I've got my friend, just a little stick over here holding everything up. And what I did, I didn't overthink this. I didn't go into the garage and go, I should have new line on my rod and reel before I go. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to take time to re-spool. Keep it simple. You know what? You can take your fishing rod from last year, and even though the line might be a little bit coiled, it's still gonna function for you. Now, I want to show you a little tip of what I did with this. So I've got just a tiny jig on here, ice fishing jig, and I put a plastic tail on. I could put a minnow on there. I could put a worm, a wax worm, live bait, but this is simple. This is something that I already have in the garage. I don't have to go out and buy it anywhere. And then I've put a slip bobber on here. So the idea behind a slip bobber is that you can put a knot on, and the weight of the jig is going to pull it to a certain point where it hits the stop, and then it's going to be at that depth. So if I want to fish 8 feet down, I don't have 8 feet of line underneath my bobber that I'm swinging around as I'm trying to cast it. But I take this a step further, because in this area that I fish, there's a lot of timber, and I get caught up a lot. I lose a lot of jigs. So what I do, I put a second bobber stop on here below the bobber. So you have to put the bead on first and then the knot. And I leave that just a few inches above my jig. That way, if I break my jig off, I can still get my bobber back, and I'm not losing, 10 bobbers that are floating around in these eddies that I'm just, oh my goodness, I can't believe I can't get those back, because they do cost money. Now, if you want to go back to your roots, and this is an important thing to think about too, this is where we all got our beginning. Even if you're a diehard walleye angler or a diehard muskie angler, we all got our starts with a bobber and a hook and a worm or something like that. Go back to your roots. Go into the garage, get one of your old standard push button rod and reels, and you know what? Have some fun with it. If you're going to take the kids out, this is a really easy way to start them out and get them casting. They can even practice in the yard, put something on there that doesn't have a hook on it. I mean, that's how I started, and I lived on a lake, but I'd be in the front yard casting and just simply practicing. And I've just got a little crappie jig with a tail on there, but I've got a different type of bobber on here. And this is a condensed foam, and it's got clips on it. So it's really, really simple. All you do is you push the top and the clip comes out. You slide it onto the line, and then you let it clip back. What I like about this is you can cast it a long way. You can really get it out there far. And if you're a kid, kind of getting a far cast is a big thing. Like accuracy, not so much. Getting a far cast, that's a big deal. But one thing to think about, if you're taking a child out, you have the distance between the bobber and the hook that they're going to be swinging around. So you have to be careful and keep your distance and make sure that they're not next to, there's a lot of brush around here right now. So making sure that they're not getting hooked all the time and having you untangle it. The other thing is, if you're taking a child out, the shorter the rod, the better. Because if they've got one of these 7.5 foot rods that an adult might use for panfish, they can hit anything within 15 feet around them. So go with a short rod if you're a kid. The other thing I want you to think about is, if you're not in an area like this where I'm actually at a dam where there's current coming in here, but there's also shallow water opportunities too as the ice leaves the lake, that you can just wade into the water. And I've had this pair of waders for a long time. They've put a lot of hours on for me, and it's really simple to just put those on, and you can explore a lot of territory just wading into the water. But you do have to be careful about it in the spring, because that water is cold. And if you step into an area that's deeper than the top of your waders, it's going to fill with water, and if there's air in there, it's going to flip you upside down, and then we have a tragedy. So we do want to exhibit safety here too. So I always suggest, if you're wearing waders, wear a PFD, and not one of the waist belts. Wear one, a standard foam, or at least one of the suspender types that'll automatically inflate. The only problem with that is if you get a little too deep, they're going to inflate anyway. So just a standard life jacket is a really good safety item to have along. One other thing I brought just to consider that a lot of people forget about, and you probably have one sitting in your garage, a minnow trap. If you're going to be here on the shoreline anyway, put a rope on here, throw it out into the water, catch your own bait, and as the as the soil thaws this spring, you can go out and dig your own worms. You used to do that as a kid all the time. Introduce that to a kid. Some kids today think the only way you get worms is by going to a bait shop. And right now, with the way things are in the state of Minnesota, you can't go directly to a bait shop to buy bait. Fortunately, like for me, growing up in this tiny community of Nevis, Minnesota, by the way, home of the world's largest concrete tiger muskie statue. Everybody gets their picture taken there. Within sight of that statue, there are 2 convenience stores that are gas stations. So they can stay open within the confinements or restrictions that we have for businesses right now in the state of Minnesota. So they can remain open, but they're both tackle shops too. So you can go in there and you can get your bait, you can get your minnows, your worms, your hooks, whatever you need. But you do want to exhibit safety too. We want you to stay home. We don't want you constantly going out into the public. So if you already have it in your garage, definitely utilize that. Some of the other tools that I brought with today are just in my pockets. Let's see what I've got in there. A nail clipper. That's always going to come in handy for tying knots. I used to bite my line when I was a kid. My dentist really doesn't like me to do that. You've noticed the forceps that I've got hooked onto my jacket. Inevitably, you come out crappie fishing or trying to catch sunfish, and you're going to tangle with a northern pike, and it's going to have the hook deep. We don't want any injuries to hands, so have a tool that you can easily remove hooks. What else do I have? An extra float. You always want to have a couple extras along. And this one's special because it's got a weight below it. So again, talking about that castability, especially when it's windy. If you have a really light bobber, it's going to be hard to have accuracy. And this is just a clip style. So all you do, you push the spring down, you wrap your line around it. And a lot of people only wrap the line around one time. But then every time that you catch a fish, the float slips down to the hook. So I always say wrap the line around it twice. The only problem with this style is when you get a big fish, even though that's not your intent, when you tangle with a largemouth bass or a northern pike and it's pulling really, really hard, the pressure point is right where your line is connected to the bobber. And a lot of times that's going to pinch and it's going to break your line right there. And then you lose your hook and the float. So a slip float, like I showed you before, is a really easy and effective method to use when you're shore fishing or even when you're in the boat out in that open water season. What else do I have in my pocket? Let's see. Just a couple things. I've got some soft plastic tails. These are Mackie Plastics. It's just the brand that I prefer. And a lot of people use these for ice fishing. They're equally effective for open water fishing too, and not just in the spring. You can use them all summer long. One final thought that I want you to think about as we progress into this spring and under the restrictions that we have right now for staying at home, but still trying to get outdoors. One is to think about going back to your roots, just like I said, and going to the beginning of fishing on the shoreline with a hook and a line and a bobber. You know, bring a chair, find a Y-shaped stick and set your rod in there and watch the bobber. Enjoy some time with somebody that's along with you. The other thing, you might want to try something new that you haven't done before. In just a couple weeks, it will be the opener for the Minnesota trout season. Buy a trout stamp. You know, like here in our area, in the Nevis Park Rapids area, we have one of the best brown trout streams in the entire upper Midwest, and a lot of people don't even realize it. The Straight River that has a population estimate of thousands of trout per mile of stream. Now you might go, well, that's kind of intimidating because I don't know how to get onto that stream. I don't know how. Well, you can contact the Department of Natural Resources, our fisheries office here in Park Rapids, and they actually have maps of all of the entry points that you can get onto the Straight River. You can walk the shoreline, you can wade it, you could kayak it if you want, if you've got a partner to have vehicles at both entry points. The other thing to think about is you don't have to go about it in a traditional, trout fishing manner. You don't have to use a fly rod and a fly. You can go so simple as spinning gear and a split shot and a small hook and throw it out there. And you might not just catch a trout, you might catch a sucker, you might catch a shiner minnow or a creek chub, some of these items that you might not catch open water fishing when you're out in a boat fishing for walleye or for muskie or for largemouth bass. So it really gives a unique opportunity to that. The last thing I want to touch base on is I walked down to this fishing spot that I've been to so many times in my entire life, and just within sight behind me I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cans that are sitting here on the shoreline, and it breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart. If you bring something in, pack it out. Pack it in, pack it out. It's that simple. And if you see trash sitting around, by all means, please help out our environment and protect it and take that stuff home with you. So that's my next job for this morning. Instead of fishing, I'm going to take care of this area, a place that's really dear to me and my heart. So this is Jason Durham telling you, I hope you have a safe, successful spring of fishing. Stay inside, but get outdoors.